Everybody, Jane here, and today I'm coming to you with my mid-month wrap-up. Now, if you've been here a while, you know it has been quite a while since I've done mid-month wrap-ups, I'd say years. But I've really been reading a lot recently, and so I decided that the long end of the month wrap-ups were becoming kind of unwieldy just with the sheer amount of books that I'm reading. So I decided to make it simple and do a mid-month wrap-up and talk about the books I've read up to the middle of January so far. This month I have had quite a few DNFs, which is probably a big contributing factor to all of the books that I've read when we're only at the middle of the month. Plus, I had a lot of books that I had started in December and that I just didn't quite finish in December, and that I finished in the early part of January. So let's get into the books I read, or in some cases, didn't read. The first one on the list is a DNF, and that is Tripping for number 68. This is a sports romance, and I talked about it in much more detail in the sports romance vlog that I did, which I will make sure to link below. Basically, you have Ronnie, or Veronica, who is a PR person, and she's been hired by this team, and she's been there for like 3 years, I think. But he is now being specially assigned to Elliot, who is kind of one of the problem players reputation-wise. His ex-girlfriend did a whole smear campaign, and so now she's trying to help him improve his image. And while she's trying to help him improve his image, they are catching feelings. This book, I think I made it to about 80 pages, and it just wasn't working for me. The writing style wasn't really hitting for me. Also, I really liked Elliot. I thought he was an in-depth, interesting character, but Ronnie just wasn't coming to life for me, and so it was hard for me to be invested in their relationship. And as things started moving along, I got frustrated because there was also problems with miscommunication, which isn't a trope I enjoy. Just to give you an idea, there's this one scene where he is on the phone with his niece and he's using kind of pet names. And so Ronnie thinks he has a girlfriend, but he doesn't have a girlfriend. And he could just say when she confronts him and she's like, "So do you have a girlfriend that I need to be getting tickets for events, etc.?" He's like, "No, I don't have a girlfriend." Okay, so instead just say, you know that she overheard you talking and you know why she's asking you this. Just say, "No, I was talking to my niece." End of story. But he doesn't say that. And like we kind of are given a reason. His niece has medical problems and he doesn't want to like drag her in to the spotlight, and I get that, but it was just really frustrating at times and didn't end up being something that I enjoyed. I actually, in that sports romance thing, DNF'd quite a lot of sports books. I think sports books are generally just not my thing, and so I will be very cautious about picking them up in the future. So yeah, this media person and hockey star is definitely just not for me. The next book that was a DNF was Lord of Eternal Darkness. Now, to be fair, this is not a book I chose for myself. This is a book my daughter chose for us to read as we were traveling. And I chose not to finish it after our travels were done. She chose the same thing though. So this is about a guy who is a witch, and he is sent as a sacrifice to this vampire. Now, the vampire is cursed by the witches, so like they cause the problem, but the witch who's sent is supposed to destroy the vampire so that they don't have to send sacrifices anymore, because like every year basically a tribute or a sacrifice is sent to the vampire. It hangs out as his house for like a month or so, and then the vampire goes into a frenzy on a certain night and drains their blood. And anyway, this witch is trying to figure out like what is going on with this vampire, and it does seem like they are going to fall in love. There's a lot of like desire happening. This book was honestly just incredibly boring, and I didn't care. We got to about, I want to say like 60% through as an audiobook, and I could not have cared less about any of these characters, and it was so slow. So I chose not to continue it after our trip was over. The next book that was also a DNF for me, these are not in the order I read them. These are just kind of my like bunched together ratings. So this is the last DNF, but all the DNFs together. The last DNF I had this month was Gwen and Art Are Not in Love. This book is about Gwen and Art, and they are in very like Arthurian-esque, or at least people are there. It's kind of medieval, but people want them to be like King Arthur and Guinevere, and they are betrothed to marry. But the problem is Gwen likes girls and Art likes boys. So they end up doing like this almost fake dating thing to cover for the fact that they aren't interested in each other as betrothed, and Gwen is interested in one of the female knights, and Art is interested, I believe, in Gwen's brother. I was listening to this as an audiobook. I got to about 30% and decided this was not for me. So, firstly, the narrator wasn't working for me. And that is not something that happens to me too often, but I felt like the narrator was kind of pushing things over the top. They reminded me of Monty Python. Like every time I turn it on, Art's narrator just had me like thinking over the top Monty Python skit. So I was having trouble like being engaged in it. Also, Gwen and Art are teenagers, and while I do read some YA books, sometimes it's a little much. And in this case, the characters, I felt like they were very YA and very immature. Also, they just weren't very likable. So their Art just kind of drinks a lot and carouses and messes with everybody. And he's also kind of a jerk in the background. And Gwen, we just had a scene shortly before I stopped reading where the knight that she is into is getting mercilessly beat down, and she has the power to stop it, but doesn't do anything and is just waiting around for somebody to solve the problem. And her brother does end up coming and keeping this knight that she's crushing on from being murdered, which was good. We didn't want the knight murdered. I just felt like I wasn't sure what this book was trying to do or where it was going. In some ways, it felt like a hate to love fake dating romance between Gwen and Art, but there's no indication that they're bisexual. So I feel like they're not going to end up together, but we're also not spending any time with them and the people that they're actually interested in. So it's very focused on Art and Gwen. And I just felt like there was no ending as I was approaching that like 30% mark. There was no ending that felt like it was going to be fulfilling and good to me, because the way this book is coded, it seems to be all about Art and Gwen's relationship, and they're betrothed, and obviously they can't be together. So I was like, if they get together and decide they like each other when there's no indication that either of them are bisexual up to this point, that feels kind of icky. But then if they don't get together, this book is like playing with the tropes that I would typically find in a romance. And I did look on Goodreads, and one of the categories this is in is romance. So I'm not really sure what this book is trying to do. I know some other people love it. The reason I tried it was a YouTuber had said they really enjoyed it. It just was not for me, and maybe other people will enjoy it a lot more than I did, but no, it was a miss. All right, so I had no 1 stars, no 2 stars, and no 3 stars so far this month. So everything that I did read, I really enjoyed. So I think that's a real win, is that I had a lot of DNFs and that sucks, but everything I did read, I really jived with. So our first 4-star is The Butcher and the Wren. This is actually one that I read because a friend of mine recommended it. In this, we have a serial killer who is being hunted by a coroner and a police officer who are really good friends. And at first, I will admit this book was kind of slow. I was just slightly into it. Like it felt like any other police procedural. Then about halfway, there's an awesome twist that I was not prepared for, did not see coming, reframed the whole book, and I really enjoyed it and got much more engaged at that point. I will say this book ends on a bit of a cliffhanger, which I didn't love. I kind of wish we'd have gotten the whole story instead of this cliffhanger ending because it felt like it wasn't as complete as I would have wanted it to be. But I am excited to read the next book and to see what happens because we now like have everything set up. We know who everybody is. The detectives know who the bad guy is, and it's like, will they catch him before more bad things happen? So overall, I did enjoy it, and I did enjoy the twist. And it was worth reading. Just know that it's a bit of a cliffhanger. You'll want to get both of the books in the series and read them kind of back to back. The next book I gave 4 stars to is a classic. Y'all, I don't read very many classics, and when I do, I don't usually love them, but this was a really good one. I read A Christmas Carol. I don't think we need to talk too in depth about what the plot was. Ebenezer Scrooge, Tiny Tim, that one. Most people know, the basics of what the story was. As far as adaptations go, I would say that a lot of adaptations follow it pretty closely. There are some differences, but it's basically everything I expected it to be. It was slightly darker than a lot of the adaptations I viewed, but A Christmas Carol is one of my favorite Christmas stories. So I was having a good time with it. I appreciated seeing the source material. There are places it's a little bit messy. There are places that the writing is kind of confusing. I was reading a Kindle version that had footnotes, so that was very useful for figuring out things that were of the time that I may not be familiar with the references today. But overall, it was a good read and I enjoyed it. The next 4-star read I had was a manga. It is Blood on the Tracks, and it is volume 16. There's 17 volumes, I believe, in the series, so I am almost done with it. This series I've kind of had a complicated relationship with, and I honestly will be very glad when it's done because while I'm overall enjoying it, this hasn't hit as well in the later books in the series as the earlier books. This book series is more or less about a boy whose mother is very mentally ill, and in the beginning we're kind of setting up who she is and why she does the things she does, and then later we have kind of a time jump of him as an adult trying to deal with how he feels about his mother, the situation, things like that. This was one of the good volumes. I understood what was going on. I kind of see where I think the author's going with this, and I think it makes sense in the bigger storyline. The beginning books were kind of horrific, and I wanted it to be a little more focused on the psychological horror aspect of what was happening, whereas this part seems to be more of a look at the complexity of trauma and mental illness and generational issues, and it's interesting. I'm not necessarily as engaged with this series as I was early in the series, but I'm still invested enough to finish the one last manga. The last 4-star that I had was actually a nonfiction, and it was For Love or Money, and it was a reread. I've got a couple rereads this month, actually. This book was written in 2015, I believe, and it is very hard to get a hold of now. I believe it is out of print technically, but I really enjoyed it when I read it, and I enjoyed it on reread, although I'm going to be doing a whole video about kind of the contents of this book. There was an edition put out after this one, so some of the things I do have to say that are critical are things that may have been taken care of in future books or future editions before it was discontinued or taken out of print. So some of the advice obviously is a little bit old and not necessarily on top of things anymore. This is a book about creative writing. And one thing I've decided I want to do this year is try monthly to read one book on writing, publishing, things like that, to really get back in the author mindset. Because the last several years, I just don't feel like I have been at my full potential as a writer, and I want to get back to that. Being a writer is so important to my identity, and reading books like this helps me stay motivated and focused. So this is very much about whether you should focus on writing books that you are really passionate about, even if they don't make you money, or writing books that do make you money, or is it possible to combine them? Some of the information, as I said, is outdated, but I expected that. There are other issues with this book too, like the formatting is not good for a print book. You have hyperlinks that appear in the book and obviously like don't take you anywhere, and it's not even typed out so that you could type out that web address and go to it. It's like there's quick links or short links, and then there's just things that are like you can see it would be blue if you were reading the whole thing. Let me see if I can find one of these because they were just all over the place. It drove me crazy. So you'll see here, like these are some of the places that there are like hyperlinks, and of course as a paperback I can't hyperlink to anything. That's not too bad with the images, but some of the images in here are really fuzzy and difficult to see. Let me see if I can find you a good one. So some of the images in here are very difficult to see. They're very fuzzy, and this just feels like it wasn't formatted well for a print book. It looks like it was intended to be like a Kindle book, and then the author didn't take that into account and didn't reformat it and just put it back up. So there's some obvious things that make this book a little less functional than it could be. And of course, as I said, there is no version of this on Kindle, so I couldn't like get the Kindle book and do the hyperlinks. The only thing that remains on Amazon is paperbacks, and they are out of print, or as far as I can tell they are. That being said, there are still a lot of things I love about this book. There's a lot of things that it did well. I just highlighted the crap out of it, like almost every couple pages, and I've got some dog ears and stuff, like just so much that I gleaned from it and took away from it. A lot of those highlights were from the first time I read it, but I added additional highlights this time I read it as well. So it is definitely a book that I think could be valuable to writers if you have the ability to get your hands on this. Just know that, it has some issues. It has some problems as a paperback, at least this edition does. And also, like, some of the information is out of date. All right, so we're moving on to my 5 stars. My first 5-star is Two Can Play. And this is the first book I've read by this author, but it will not be the last. It was excellent. It is about these two characters who are at rival video game making studios. And they have been hired, their studios have been hired to work on a joint project. This is a project the girl is really passionate about. She wanted this project so bad because she read the books that this project is based on, and she really wants to bring them to life. This is like a heart project for her. So she and her crew have to get along with the guy, I think his name is Jesse, and his crew so that they can make this video game thing together. And they both, it turns out, have a passion for this project, but they don't like each other. They have they have some bad blood between them, and so they've got to figure out how to get past that so they as individuals can work together because they're both kind of in charge of their teams, and then also so that they can come together in the romance, because that's what the book is about. I did love the romance. I thought it was so fun. There was quite a bit for the size for it being a novella. There was quite a bit of smexy times, but I didn't necessarily mind that. There was a place in it where I was kind of getting annoyed with how much smexy stuff was happening, but then I was over it and we were having a good time again. I love the discussion of video games. I'm a gamer, so I'm always passionate about that. And as a novella, it worked. I don't like novellas as well as novels, but this one I enjoyed enough to give 5 stars. So despite it being kind of short, I thought it worked well. All right, the next 5 star we have is an Ice Planet Barbarian book. I'm almost through the Ice Planet Barbarian series, and y'all know I love them. And this was one that hit really well. And this is Barbarian's Treasure. This is Megan and Cashell's book. And I loved that they are both complex characters. So for people who don't know the series, Ice Planet Barbarians is about these women who are kidnapped from Earth. The aliens that kidnapped them to sell them into slavery end up crash landing on this ice planet. And there is a local tribe there that ends up taking these women in, and they become fated mates with these people on this planet. The men's society has recently had a very terrible plague and are like going extinct. There are two women in like two women of childbearing age in their encampment. So you have all these men who are remaining who are never going to get married, never going to have babies, likely never have those things because there's just no women. So all these women from the alien society crash landed and suddenly are fated mates to these guys. And it's lovely. Megan in particular has a really interesting, complex backstory. So Megan, prior to being abducted, was pregnant. The aliens ended that pregnancy for her, the initial aliens, the bad ones. And so she is grieving the loss of her pregnancy. She is grieving, there's a society now that she's getting struck into. She's lost all this stuff. Now she's in this society and she's really concerned because initially she's concerned because she doesn't become a fated mate really quickly. And she's afraid that the things that the aliens did to her body to end her pregnancy might have made her sterile. And if so, she's a little bit concerned about how she's going to make her way and survive on this planet where, they are absolutely dependent on this tribe to take care of them. And she's so afraid of being like cast out because when they find out that she can't have babies, or she's worried that she can't have babies, because that must be why she isn't like getting mated to any of these guys. So I loved the complexity and depth of her character. There was a point in the story where I was getting kind of irritated with some of the stuff happening. Particularly, it just seemed like a lot of smexy times. And I like smexy times in the Ice Planet Barbarian books, but like it was just so much. And I was like, can we just stop the smexy times? But like it was all necessary and important to the plot. And I liked just how everything went. I thought it was a very good one. It made me cry. I had a lot of big feelings. I love the Ice Planet Barbarian books where there is a lot of emotion and where the characters have complicated backstories. And this one delivered so well, and I really enjoyed it. It's not a new favorite, but it's definitely a good one. Like I give a lot of the Ice Planet Barbarians 5 stars. I don't know that it's one that I would go out of my way to reread. It's not in my top 3, but I did enjoy it quite a bit. The last book is also an Ice Planet Barbarians, but this one was a reread, and that is Barbarian's Mate. This is one of my top 3 favorite Ice Planet Barbarian books, and I love it. It might be my favorite. I'm going to do a reread of the other 2 that are like my top 3. and see if I can sort out which one is my favorite in my mind. I didn't just pick this up as a pleasure read, though, I will say. I was picking it up for research purposes. I am working on a story where there is an adventure that happens and the characters are out in the wilderness, basically. And I wanted to see how that was handled in this book because in this book, there is a little bit of adventuring. I guess I should back up. So we've explained what Ice Planet is about. This particular book, we have Josie and Haydn. And Josie is just one of those really fun, deep characters. She was a foster child. She wants nothing more than to have a family and have the love that she never had growing up and really find her tribe. And unfortunately, when she was kidnapped by the aliens, she had an IUD in. And so she is afraid that she's never going to be able to have babies, much like Megan was. However, her IUD pops out at the end of the book in front of this one. And so now she's like, yay, I get to find my fated mate. She is so stoked. I think of all of the women in this scenario, she has been the one who is most ready for her husband. She's like, bring him on, bring me a husband. And so she's wandering the cave, like, and we're getting her processing of like, oh, well, that guy's kind of old, but I mean, okay. And oh, I'm glad I didn't fated mate to him. It's called Resonate in their world. But anyway, so she's like wandering around and she finally gets her fated mate. And it is the one guy she freaking hates in this whole tribe. And that's Haydn. And Haydn, again, deep backstory. So Haydn has already been mated. And so they didn't think he could be mated again because in their thing, that's not something that happens. But his circumstances are really complicated. So anyway, he has this background of he lost his mate in the sickness, the plague that caused problems, and he almost died. And because he almost died, that's why he can get a mate again when everybody else can't. Because of stuff that happened when they were fixing him from being sick. Anyway, so he and her have this really complex relationship. He was so heartbroken about his previous mating, and the girl was awful. And then him and Josie have a hard time getting along. And she's like, anybody but you. Anybody but you. And among other things, there is a point where they go off adventuring to try to like break the fated mate thing. And that's why I picked it up to read over like some of the stuff that happens as they were going on. And I could have just probably read just those parts for the research I was doing, but I didn't. I wanted to give this a reread again, and it was just lovely the second time around as well. Like, I really love this book so much. I read it in 2 days, and the only reason I read it in 2 days instead of 1 day is because I absolutely had to put it down to go to sleep because life was busy. Otherwise, I would have finished it in 1 day. Like, I had to like force myself to put it down because even as a reread, even when I knew what happened, it was so freaking good. So yes, those are the books I've read by the middle of January. I would love to hear about the books that you've read. What have you enjoyed? What hasn't worked out so well for you? This has been Jane. Please leave a like and a comment. Subscribe if you're not subscribed yet, and I'll see you next time. Bye!